Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, reporting from the Russian war in Ukraine. In today's podcast, 51st week of war in Ukraine, and this is the third week of February 2023. In today's podcast, Bakhmut updates, Russian losses are huge, and we're going to talk about that Russia is changing its strategy and started using more aviation because it couldn't achieve any gains on the ground. Our fighters do not allow the enemy to achieve their goals and cause very serious losses. In particular, in some assault units of the Wagner Private Army and units of the Russian Army, losses amount sometimes to 80% of personnel. Evacuation of the dead and wounded by the enemy is very limited or not carried out at all. When Ukraine armed forces push the enemy back, you can see dozens or sometimes hundreds of dead bodies that Russian soldiers couldn't take with them. There are cases when dead bodies of Russian troops have been laying on the ground for weeks and turn into green color and start decomposing. Soldiers from the front lines sometimes see how birds and wild animals or dogs start feeding of these dead people. As a result, among the personnel of the Russian occupying forces in the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine, there is a significant decrease in the level of trust in the decisions of the command regarding the conflict of the hostilities. More and more Russian servicemen are realizing that their commanders are inadequately assessing the situation on the battlefield, as evidenced by the intensive use so-called death squads. Death squads units that stopped by insufficiently trained mobilized personnel which suffer heavy combat and sanitary losses on a daily basis. In particular, only one initial sentry in the territory of the Russian Federation, the Rostov region, sends about 500 hastily trained mobilized troops every week, most of whom undergo an accelerated training course from 14 to 21 days, which is totally nothing. On average, before a soldier is being sent to the front lines, he must undergo 6 months of training. So we understand that those soldiers are not soldiers, they're just basically civilians that dressed up in the uniforms. The severest battle for Bakhmut town in the eastern Ukraine continues, and as you know, the fighting there has been going on for the last 10 months. In the northern part of the city, the private army Wagner Group did manage to enter the northern side of the village Paraskoivka. Meanwhile, the Russian mercenaries claim to have taken full control of this settlement. However, there is no official evidence for that. New Ukrainian front line is now in the hills directly east of the MO3 highway running from Zarizhняnsky of southwestern Parahiivka down to the northern inches to Krasnohora village. Eastern part of Bakhmut town. The Ukrainian armed forces damaged Russian groups in this direction and advanced there, clearing street by street in the east of Bakhmutska River in the last couple of days. South of Bakhmut, this is the region with the critical situation in the last 6 or 7 days, with plenty of reasons for more serious concerns. As reported, the Russians brought in the 3rd Motor Rifle Brigade, pushed with all forces on Ivanivska village. This unit was rebuilt for the 4th time over the last 12 months due to big losses of troops. Apparently, lately it was at least partially restaffed with newly recruited forces. Anyway, The 3rd Motor Rifle Brigade pushed over that hill north of Klitschivka on Ivanivska, with Wagner Private Army pushing in direction of Chasiv Yar. Aim of both assaults was the road 0504, which connects Kurdimiivka village with Bakhmut town. However, the weather was bad, very foggy, so it's very complicated surveillance by the drones on both sides. Moreover, Ukrainian troops were exposed to such fierce and sustained assaults that they began running out of everything: artillery shells, mortar shells, replacement barrels for machine guns. The Bakhmut battle is fearless. There is a lot of rumors that Ukrainian forces will have no choice but to leave this town. However, there are no reasons for the armed forces of Ukraine to leave the city. In fact, the Ukrainian troops in Bakhmut could be at risk if the Russian occupiers take control of both highways, MO3 highway and 0504 road, which are the northern and southern roads that lead to the city and which are important for the logistical support of the units defending the city. Therefore, as long as there is no threat to these routes, they cutting and taken under control, then we don't have to talk about withdrawal soon. Bakhmut town plays an important role, and this role play the role of a trap. For almost 9 months, this town has been concentrating the forces and resources of the Russian invaders in large numbers, and they are being destroyed constantly. We're already talking about tens of thousands of destroyed and wounded Russian occupiers whose resources could have been used in other direction during this time. Last fall, we were also predicted that Bakhmut would be abandoned, but the town continues to resist and quite effectively, sometimes even with counterattacks of the Ukrainian armed forces. The main thing missing near Bakhmut is more artillery, especially the mortar component. Moreover, as I understand, the Russians will not drop the idea to take over Bakhmut. They will continue to increase the pressure, and if this pressure continues to increase primarily on the infantry component, then we must also increase the means that can block this infantry component as effectively as possible. As you might remember, to take over Bakhmut is important because Putin realized he cannot take over the whole Ukraine. However, he needs to sell some victory to its citizens. So, he gave the order to completely take over Donbass, which is Luhansk and Donetsk regions. And Bakhmut is one of the towns that doesn't allow them to achieve the goal. But if Ukraine had to leave Bakhmut, it would not change the situation much. Let's assume that armed forces left. What do the Russian occupiers do in that case? They will start moving in the direction of the next town of the region, which is Slavyansk. And this town is more than 30 kilometers or approximately 22-23 miles of defense lines. This is the distance they will have to cover to reach Slavyansk. In fact, we're talking about that if they carry out their offensive actions to Bakhmut for the 9 months and only were able to push Ukraine armed forces only for 10 kilometers or 7 miles, then can you imagine how long it's gonna take them to get through those 30 kilometers or 23 miles to the next town? It's gonna be simply another meat grinding. And this is if we do not pay attention to Kramatorsk and Konstantinivka and Druzhivka. If they pass through these villages, which are nearby Bakhmut, each of these cities will become another Bakhmut for them. Therefore, in my opinion, Even if there is a situation where the armed forces withdraw from Bakhmut, it will not give the Russians any global advantage in their plans to capture the whole Donetsk region. Again, they currently do not have the resources to capture the Donetsk, nor until the beginning of the spring, or maybe not at all. Russia, however, understands they need to change the strategy. Russia at least double number of troops in Donbas region and continues its offensive for the second week in a row. The enemy will attack where we have poorly equipped, not deep defenders, where intelligence and management is weak, where fire means do not work accurately, where weakened and exhausted units are located. The nature of the fighting in the second year of the war is changing. Large scale actions and breakthroughs must be prevented by a sharp decrease in the enemy's fighting capacity in certain areas of the front. Russia has not had any success on the ground and they try to change the strategy. Russia has significant advantage in the sky. The number of jets and helicopters the aggressor state has is 10 times more than of the Ukrainian army. There are indeed signs that Russia will again try to use aviation intensively in the expected offensive to change the situation at the front lines and gain some victory. If we briefly go back to the beginning of the war, the Russian aviation could not operate in the Ukrainian skies without hindrance, and this was a surprise for the Russian pilots. Why it happened and what happened? They didn't expect any resistance from Ukraine armed forces. Russian propaganda reported that Ukraine air defense and Ukrainian aviation were totally destroyed. In fact, did a disservice to the Russian pilots themselves. It was a big surprise for them. Then they started to be beaten. On some days, Ukrainians shot down several Russian military jets, which is a big loss for the air forces of Russia. Russian aviation changed tactics. At first, they worked at all heights, from the small to large over the whole territory of Ukraine. Then, at some point, they realized that at the medium and high altitudes, there is a high probability of being targeted by the Ukraine air defense systems and ground systems. Then, they tried to operate only from the low altitudes, and here they met with unexpected number of portable air defense systems that shut down number of Russian military jets. And in the end, what they came to what not to enter the airspace of Ukraine beyond the front line. This is where they feel relatively safe, so as not to be hit by the anti-craft fire. As you know, that recently Russian armed forces had been shelling the cities from its territory, as well using Belarusian territory to damage Ukrainian cities. As of today, Russia's superiority in aviation remains. There are certain data on the number of combat aircraft of the Russian Federation. However, numerical indicators provide only 50% of the full picture because the quantity is the quality of Russian aircraft. The technological advantage is preserved, but the key factor comes next. This is the professional training of the flight crew and the ability to conduct complex operations. The questions remain whether Russia has sufficiently learned the lesson of the beginning from the beginning of the war, because it was noted that Russian Air Force was completely unprepared to conduct complex operations. That is, they acted as part of pairs, links, but this is not a complex operation when dozens of aircrafts are involved and each group performs its function, such as anti-craft suppression, simultaneous strikes, cover, search and rescue operations. Russia could not demonstrate this, and it is obviously that at the beginning of the war they didn't know how to do this. Now, regarding the possibilities of using the Russian airspace forces, there is a tactical aviation operation and strategic one. The strike, delivered by cruise missile from the depth of their Russian territory, the Caspian Sea, is operational strategic aviation. They have practiced their actions, and there is no need for great skill because they operate in complete safety from Ukraine air defense means. As for tactical aviation, pre front line, both helicopters and attack aircrafts, bombers, all these Su 25, Su 35, and Su 30 aircrafts, if we are talking about ground targets, then they capable hit them in line of sight range. This is what requires the aircraft to approach the air defense impact zone. If we talk about bombing, as it happened, for example, in Mariupol, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, then most likely these possibilities are now significantly limited because the actions of the Ukraine air defense forces cannot be compared to those that took place in the first month of the war. Ukraine has more advanced Western air defense systems that usually destroy up to 80% of rockets and missiles of the terrorist country. If we talk about fighter aircraft, then yes, Russia operates with more modern aircraft that can identify, capture targets at a range of more than 100 kilometers, and modern Russian missiles can also hit air targets at a range of 100 kilometers, which is approximately 75 miles. This is the threat that comes from fighter aircraft such as MiG 31K, but the number of such advanced jets is limited in Russia. I think they will keep using such jets as we have been seeing lately, mostly as a blackmail. Every time the jet takes off from the field, for example in Belarus and Russia, there is an air alert throughout Ukraine. Russia's new alleged attempt to intensify use aviation is an attempt to compensate for the lack of offensive capabilities. Now, everyone is wondering, trying to understand whether this new offensive of Russian Federation is already in its active phase or whether it is still a preparatory phase. But unequivocally, even if we proceed from those political goals, the achievement of strategic success by the anniversary of the invasion, which is on February 24th, then it's obvious at this time, in view of the data available regarding the concentration of forces in tactical, operational depth, that it's unlikely will be possible. Russian forces still looking for ways how to improve their tactics, how to improve their strategy, and how to gain more and more land. However, Ukraine armed forces started receiving more and more Western weapons and successfully repel all these attacks. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to my podcast.